Hello, everybody, and welcome to the reality show. Today, I've got Razzie with me, fresh on his travels around the world, and Jonathan and Kirk. How's it going, guys?
Oh,
Very good. So we have a couple of topics today. The main one, which we're going to start with, is about UNRWA, who we've been covering a lot on the channel, being nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. We're going to talk very calmly and not impassionedly about that at all. And then as secondary topics, we have some stories about basically anti-Semitism of a sperm donor being rejected on the grounds that he's Israeli or Jewish. Actually, he's not Israeli; he's just Jewish. And then also a scandal that's unfolding within the BBC at the moment, where one of its kind of head controllers referred to white people as parasites and Jews as Nazis. So, but we'll get to all that. Let's start with the Nobel Peace Prize story. So, just to lay the groundwork, I guess. This nomination is coming from a Norwegian member of parliament, if I'm getting that right. His name is Asmund Ankrust. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. He's a member of their Labour Party. Um, and I'll just read out his statement about as to why he nominated them. So he said that he nominated UNRWA for its long-term work to provide vital support to Palestine and the region in general. This work has been crucial for 70 years and each more vital and is certainly more vital in the last 3 months. Rather extraordinary, really, because obviously the context is that UNRWA has been discovered to have had its employees have at least 12, and actually, of course, far more directly involved with Hamas and involved with what happened on October 7th. So there's something kind of deeply perverse about this. But Razzie, I'll come to you first. What was your reaction on hearing this story?
yeah. I mean, so we just talked in the Daily Objective about Britain saying that they will consider recognizing a Palestinian state as soon as there's a ceasefire, and this is along the same lines. The pro-Palestinian side in the West is looking for different ways to reward the Palestinians for October 7th. None of them are going to say it that way, but there's no, how else would you see this situation? The Palestinians did, the best that they've done so far in their attempts to kill Jews on October 7th. That was their most successful attack. And the West showed sympathy for a few days to Israel and to Israelis, and then as soon as Israel started doing again what I think is nowhere near enough of a military response, the West is taking the side of the Palestinians stronger than ever before, which is as clear a statement as one can make that terrorism will be rewarded. And it's not a surprise. Norway is one of those countries that didn't stop funding UNRWA. This member of parliament is from the governing party. And, if you look at past Nobel Peace Prize winners, UNRWA probably deserves it in the sense of, if you want to be consistent, yeah, Yasser Arafat won it. He held the title of the person who killed most Jews since Hitler, which I think now that title has been lost to Hamas. But the Nobel Peace Prize is a good indication of where war is about to break out or where somebody is responsible for war.
Yeah, and I guess it's worth saying about the Nobel Prizes. A lot of them are very controversial in general in terms of who they pick and the biases in their picking. And I'm a bit more familiar with the problems with them when they nominate people for literature, but that's slightly less important. And as you say, some of the previous laureates include Yasser Arafat, who he was given it jointly with Yitzhak Rabin, if I remember. So there's this kind of history of moral equivalence between these people, even though, Arafat was
Morgan, I
basically.
have to say this question combines, two things. First of all, happy Rand's Day to everyone on the panel. Today is Ayn Rand's birthday, so happy Rand's Day to that. I'm glad we're talking about her work and these important pressing topics. But I thought this UNRWA panel or this UNRWA program question and the Nobel Prize combined two things that I know that Dr. Peikoff and Miss Rand hated. Right, one was the United Nations and the other was the Nobel Prize. And there's some great materials on exactly this. Augustina had a terrific article from just 2 years ago now about Miss Rand's view on the United Nations. She did not hold it in high regard, high esteem at all. And that's a shock because, Razzie, as you alluded to, everyone's kind of brought up this idea of like, oh, the United Nations is something good, something to aspire to. And, Miss Rand obviously had a much different perspective. The other is this idea of a Nobel Prize. And Dr. Peikoff answered this, both with regard to himself and what he thought Miss Rand would say. He was asked, would winning the Nobel Prize for Literature have meant anything to Ayn Rand? He's got a great response to that. Long story short, it would not. And he was also asked very much the same question. Would winning the Nobel Prize mean anything to him? So go check out his website to learn a bit about that. Needless to say, he disapproved of both of them, and I do too.
Yeah, and quite rightly. And for its history of ignoble winners, really. Some of whom are just basically awarded it seems, for symbolic reasons, which I think is basically what this is. It's a kind of stunt. Because the nominations are actually secret. And this guy has deliberately publicized that he's done it, and presumably that's why he's done it. Kirk, what did you make of this?
Yeah, it's like what you said. It sounds like they're trying to just take a nice big, they're trying to take a box with a gigantic turd in it and then wrap it up as nicely as possible. Make it look shiny or whatnot. It's like taking a nice shiny car that you see in a showroom at a dealership and then finding out that the engine underneath doesn't work. That's what it's like giving this organization, after it's been discovered that many of its members were responsible for the attacks on October 7th. Does that sound like bringing about world peace at all? And now people in Norway are trying to nominate them for the Peace Prize?
I mean, it's just straight up altruism, right? Like, of course, we have to fund this organization, secretly working to undermine our own interests. Of course, and it's all dressed up as Rand identified again 40 years ago as this disgusting altruism. And we as objectivists, when we say we should, withdraw the United Nations, exit, they say, "Oh my God, you're so radical. You're so crazy. You're so extreme." But to be part of this club and let alone to fund it, it's not just extreme; it's lunacy.
And I think it might be worth noting that some of the biggest losers of an act like this are people who may have won it in the past and do deserve it. Like last year, an activist from Iran got it for her fight against oppression of women in Iran. That sounds like a worthy title to me, to give someone like that the Peace Prize. Or like when Malala Yousafzai won it for her courage to stand up to the Taliban when she was trying to go to school. Like, it sounds like she's really deserving of an award like this, and to give it to, I mean, then there's the fact that the United Nations in general has won it like 25 times, I think. Al Gore won it in 2007 for making a dumb movie, essentially. And to give it to this corrupt organization within a corrupt organization just really takes away any legitimacy of the other winners who genuinely deserved it.
Well,
I guess,
as I remember, Dr. Peikoff, I believe, someone double checking on this, said he would not accept it. He wouldn't take that honor. He wouldn't want to be associated. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but with it. But is it even such an honor?
yeah, and I guess just to read out the criteria which the Nobel Committee is supposed to evaluate this by. The award is meant to go to the person who has done the most or the best work for fraternity between nations, for the abolition or the reduction of standing armies, and for the holding and promotion of peace congresses. Now, I think very clearly UNRWA fails on all of those counts, right? Because what we know about UNRWA very distinctly now is that they have been perpetuating the conflict the whole time. And if you go look at their YouTube channel, there's a fairly sickly video that they published in 2010 called Peace Starts Here. And it's kind of a video of their works, I guess, of children running around dancing and laughing. Presumably they cut out the bits where they indoctrinate them into anti-Semitism because that doesn't play so well. And at the end, they list all their values, which are kind of equal rights, justice, respect, and all this kind of stuff, which actually we know is not actually what they've been teaching to the kids at all. And they're the people who've been making sure this conflict lasts into the next generation. So they're exactly the first person who should be disqualified. And there was something quite amusing but pertinent put on Twitter by Eitan Fischberger, who we interviewed yesterday, where he said, is this actually just a ploy to lure Yahya Sinwar out of hiding in the tunnels to come and accept this prize? I suspect that's not what it is, but we'll have to see. Razi.
Yeah, I whenever I hear about Yahya Sinwar in Israel almost finding him in the tunnels, I think I'd be very, very surprised if he hasn't escaped, on October 7th or 8th. I think it's very optimistic to think that he's still there. But yeah, Kirk, thanks for the reminder that Al Gore won the Nobel Peace Prize for making a movie telling us that we're all going to die if we don't stop using fossil fuels. Yeah, I mean, I remembered the one where Obama won for being elected. Basically, he hadn't served yet, but he was not George W. Bush, and that won him the prize. So yeah, this prize has a history that is consistent with this nomination, and of course, again, like this nomination is consistent with where we've seen Norway stand on this for a long time. I mean, the Oslo Accords are not accidentally named after the capital of Norway, and the fact that this is one politician, but the he is a politician from the ruling party, so yeah, not much surprise there. Thank you, Apollo Zeus, for the super chat at the end of the previous show. Thank you, Andreo, for the generous super chat. He says, guys, thank you for all your hard work and bringing factual content. Special thanks to Razi Ginsburg. I enjoyed your previous show. Thank you. Thank you. You misspelled my name, but super chat that generous. You were allowed to misspell my name.
It brings me back to this idea of sanction. When you ever have a problem with someone, people say, "Oh, are you going to go to war? Are you going to, but just to sanction something like the UN or the Nobel Prize." And that's what I really admire about, again, when I remember Dr. Peikoff saying that he wouldn't accept it. He wouldn't sanction it. So why do we sanction the UN? Just by being involved with it, let alone funding it. And, Kirk, you're absolutely right in terms of the knowledge of what was going on there. And didn't the UN know all these hospitals were used as weapons depots and Hamas hideouts? I mean, this was all done on the down low. And what's so frustrating, again, it's we're funding our own enemies, and only altruism, I imagine, is what makes that possible.
While we're on the topic of politicians getting nominated for this award, and people getting nominated for this award in the context of what's going on in the Middle East, who else was nominated for the Nobel Prize the other day in relation to what's going on in the Middle East?
No.
Donald Trump was nominated by Republican Claudia Tenney, who said Donald Trump was instrumental in facilitating the first new peace agreements in the Middle East in almost 30 years, adding that for decades, bureaucrats, foreign policy professionals, and international organizations insisted that additional Middle East peace agreements were possible without a resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. President Trump proved that to be false. And I remember during his presidency, like a lot of his cheerleaders were they really wanted him to win it after his meeting with Kim Jong-un. And it's there's definitely this sense that a lot of people want this award for some false sense of prestige and just this award. It's kind of like it's in a lot of cases when it comes to the politicization of this. I think Yaron Brook mentioned this when talking about how Harry Kissinger was awarded this Nobel Prize back in the 1970s, and I think he mentioned that it may have been for political purposes. But it does seem like a lot of people are desperate for like their favorite politician or whatever to win this award for the sake of prestige.
Yeah, and there's something repulsive about the idea of prestige. Whenever this kind of thing comes up, I always end up thinking of Rand's essay, The Monument Builders, although it's not directly what she's talking about. Is this similar kind of thing, the way in which countries, especially disreputable countries, seem to want to bolster themselves by these kind of awards or by building monuments. And in a sense, what this Norwegian MP is trying to do is to provide prestige, I guess, to UNRWA, or to at least kind of provide it some greater credibility on the world stage. Razi, anything else to say?
Yes, another organization that was nominated is B'Tselem, the Israeli, I think their official title for themselves is Israeli Human Rights Organization for people in the Palestinian territories or something like that. We spoke about B'Tselem on 2 separate episodes that were dedicated to that organization. The first one was called Israel's Enemy Within. It's an organization that if it doesn't legally meet the definition of treason, certainly morally, that's where it is. When we hear about settler violence against Palestinians in the West Bank, much of that comes from the video cameras that that B'Tselem gives to Palestinians to film violence against them, which of course is it's not a difficult thing to orchestrate. And again, whoever nominated them and whoever votes for them presumably knows what they do, knows that they are actively promoting violence. There's no other way to look at this. So
Right, and that's what I'm just saying. So whenever it's like, oh, UN commission says this, UN policy says that. I mean, why should that mean anything to any rights respecting individual? It's our, i.e., not our individual participation in it, but our nation's participation in it. And its sanction is this quasi-governmental body, I think, that makes it so repulsive. When the National Socialists or the Libertarians vote on something, I say whoop-de-doo. But the UN has this special status as this, non-governmental government that we sanction. And that's why I hate it.
Yeah. And I guess we should say for people that although they've been nominated, it doesn't mean that the committee has yet kind of recognized their nomination, and something which I guess we'll be keeping a very close eye on, and which I think the world will be very closely scrutinizing them for, as to whether they recognize the nomination. Because if they do that, then it stops just being a repulsive, but just a kind of low stunt, and it becomes something much more serious. So that doesn't still mean they win, but that would mean that they are in effect the nomination is getting sanctioned from the Nobel Committee. I think the adding up kind of sum of what we're saying is that it just further lowers the value of the Nobel Prize. When I was a kid growing up, Nobel Prizes kind of held in my mind a kind of like an esteem. I think like it was an impressive thing for if a writer I liked had won the Nobel Prize for literature, or if a journalist had won the similar kind of things. And yet the disappointing thing is, once you grow up and you look very closely at it, it's actually an award which has been awarded to so many disreputable people, especially the Peace Prize, and which has been awarded to so many people on an inconsistent basis that it just becomes meaningless. And so, yeah. So, Kirk, Jonathan.
Go listen to what Dr. Peikoff said about winning the Nobel Prize, both him and Miss Rand, for more on this in particular. Really interesting response.
By the way, as a left-wing kid in Israel, I was so proud when Rabin won the award with Arafat, and all the more reason that the voting age should be raised. But that's a story for a different day, and I was not yet of voting age. Thank you, Andreo, for an additional generous super chat. Says, sorry, Razi Ginsburg. There you go. That is the correct spelling of my name. And there was another comment. Oh, so Christian Klein says, Sheldon Cooper wanted the Nobel Prize won the Nobel Prize by creating New Jerusalem in the Mexican desert. I stopped watching the show at some point. So this must have been after that point. If anybody here, yeah.
I like watching good TV, so I haven't watched The Big Bang Theory, or is that young Sheldon, I guess.
That can't be young Sheldon. I don't think young Sheldon won the Nobel Prize.
I have to step in as the Big Bang Theory fan. Basically, there was one time where there was like really a young, like 15-year-old or 14-year-old that was like really good at physics, and Sheldon was like, okay, I'm giving up. I cannot get a Nobel Prize in physics, so I'm gonna get it for peace, and I'm gonna do it by solving the Israel-Palestinian conflict by moving the Jews to Mexico, basically.
Actually, that I can see somebody winning the Nobel Peace Prize for suggesting to ethnically cleanse Israel of all Jews. That seems plausible.
Well, I mean, whilst you're sort of being a touch facetious, that I guess the serious point which people should take away is that the history of the people who've won the Nobel Peace Prize includes so many disreputable people that actually, even though this is just a nomination for now, there's something very plausible about the fact that UNRWA could win it. It seems something that would actually be very appealing to the Nobel Committee, just the symbolism of it to this, benighted charitable organization who have been persecuted by all these nasty Western countries, right?
Well, do we know that the Nobel Committee is full of the most rational, rights respecting individual? I mean, is this, who makes up this, why are they the council of elders whose opinions matter so much?
Well, yeah. I mean, so I've never looked up who it is actually who evaluates for the Peace Prize, but I remember looking up once for the Literature Prize, and essentially, as you might expect, it's a lot of kind of arbitrary authorities who are given this responsibility, and therefore, and there's no real criteria by which they're properly evaluating it. They have the criteria that Nobel laid down, but you see all these people getting nominated and winning for all these different prizes. And when you look at the rationale, it actually has very little to do with what Nobel had written down as a justification for the prize. And so, before we move on to the next topic, then anything final to say on the Peace Prize?
Yeah, I feel like this would be like if the NBA MVP was like awarded to like the worst player on like the worst team in the NBA like every 5 to 10 years, but like for the most part they maybe gave it to more eligible players, and it's like it really undermines the award. The people who do deserve it, they just completely undermine when you just give it to like a joke of a player who doesn't deserve it.
Yeah, and so I mean, previous winners, as amongst all the disreputable people, there are people like Malala Yousafzai, and even though I don't know that she'd done something to promote peace, there's certainly a kind of worthy symbolism, I guess, in that this was a girl who was standing up for education of young women in Afghanistan and was almost murdered for it. So there's something great about that, but then at the same time, there's still something kind of foggy about the criteria. Why is she winning the prize for peace? Is there not something sort of more applicable? So in effect, almost anybody could win the Peace Prize for almost anything.
Yeah, and
And I think
when it's
go on.
just even when it's somebody who's standing up to oppression, that's a great thing, but you don't know where they stand, generally on. Aung San Suu Kyi also won the award because she stood up to oppression, and then she became the leader, and then she became the oppressor. So.
Yeah.
So yeah, the fact that somebody is against something bad doesn't mean that they are good.
Yeah, although I've never actually looked into the details of the Rohingya genocide, she is someone else who's on trial in the International Court of Justice over genocide. And she ended up becoming a defender of the army, which kept her under house arrest for so many years. And I don't know whether this is another example of her being unjustly penalized for that, but there is something ironic about the fact that she was such a hero of the kind of the international kind of humanitarian left, if you want to describe them that way. That's a bit of a vague description. And they gave her this prize, and then she is now in effect a pariah for all of these reasons. But Kirk, what were you going to say?
Well, no, it's something dawned on me that maybe the people who are more deserving of this award are people who tend to not seek it. They are really standing up in what they believe in a cause, whereas the people who are least deserving are seemingly the ones who just want it for prestige, and they're getting people to lobby it on their behalf for political reasons. So I think there's kind of an irony in that. And I think you also see that a lot in professional sports where people who deserve like the MVP award, they're not trying to get the MVP award. They just are busting their ass and trying to be the best as they can be. And they're not necessarily trying to do it for the sake of just winning a trophy.
I'll quickly jump in. Douglas Lindsay, who is one of our YouTube monthly subscribers. It's not a lot of money. I think it's £5 a month. Turns out pounds is what they call dollars in the mighty UK. Who knew? Douglas Lindsay contributes. He says the Nobel Peace Prize should be awarded based on action, not words. Interesting perspective. And thank you, Doug, for being part of our monthly contributors on YouTube.
Yeah. By the way, as a YouTube member, Douglas has access to the Sunday edition of this show, the Reality Show Extra, which you have to be a member in order to watch. We also have super chats from Akira. Thank you, Akira. Akira says, I'd be surprised if they nominated good people. I mean, look, the number of people who can nominate is so vast that good people could be nominated, but I don't know about their chances of winning. And thank you, Apollo Zeus, for the super chat. So I did want to say, because you guys have been having all this fun without me all week talking about UNRWA, and I feel left out. I just want to say generally, it's great to see countries defunding UNRWA. I'm a bit worried that it's going to be temporary. Like, okay, we're going to hold these funds until you fire enough people that we can say, look, okay, UNRWA has changed, so we can now fund it again. I don't think this is the end of UNRWA. I would like to be wrong on that, and I think we will keep talking about UNRWA until it is the end of UNRWA. But yeah, it's better than nothing. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And I guess, so I mentioned before the essay, The Monument Builders, and I'll just very quickly just read out this small excerpt from it, because I think especially what she says at the end of this excerpt is very relevant, especially to UNRWA. So she writes, unearned greatness is so unreal, so neurotic a concept that the wretch who seeks it cannot identify it even to himself. To identify it is to make it impossible. He needs the irrational, undefinable slogans of altruism and collectivism to give a semi-plausible form to his nameless urge and anchor it to reality, to support his own self-deception more than to deceive his victims. And, well, whether UNRWA needs to deceive itself or not, I don't know. Presumably Philip Lazzarini does need to deceive himself. But also the idea that they're deceiving their victims, UNRWA very much is doing that, and it's leeching off of the Western taxpayers in order to continue this conflict. And as we say, there's something so perverse about that to then nominate them for a prize for peace.
Thanks for sharing that, Morgan.
My pleasure. Okie dokie. Should we move on to the next story? So this story is a story from Australia, and this is a story of a young gay man who's a hairdresser and had been working with a lesbian couple, it seems to be their sperm donor. And they've been doing this for months. And then following October 7th, I can't remember exactly when he received this message. I presume it was fairly recently. He received a message saying that they could no longer basically accept his donation, as they, if I'm getting the quote right, they struggle to navigate aspects of his identity. So in effect, they couldn't do it because he's Jewish, which is a fairly shocking story. And I think basically is a clear and cut case of anti-Semitism. Even if they were to say they felt in some way they couldn't sanction an Israeli, as terrible as that would be, as far as I'm aware, he isn't an Israeli, he's just Jewish. Now, Razi, what was your reaction to this story?
Yeah, it's I don't know historically if racists were more open about, or bigots in general more open about their bigotry and not coming up with these word salads like trying difficulty navigating aspects of you're a Jew, we don't want your Jew sperm. That's what they mean. That's they. So yeah, and again, like bigotry against Jews is not just legitimate among large parts of the population in the West, and the only legitimate view in large parts of the Middle East. But it's yeah, it seems it's obviously getting worse, and I don't know. The only comfort I take in this is the fact that this story is a story, a little bit of a story, and yeah,
it's
also depressing.
That there's enough people at least to be shocked by this, that news organizations consider it worthy of reporting is pretty good. The depressing thing about it, though, is again something I mentioned on the show yesterday, I think, is that I'm only seeing this reported in basically the right-wing press. I haven't seen this coming from the left. Now, that might just be me missing it, but so often anti-Semitism is the kind of prejudice that left-wing people think only right-wing people care about. And so in effect, they kind of almost disown it, or they seem to be less interested in it than their own preferred forms. And that is really just a form of tribalism. And that's what's another awful part of this story. Jonathan, what did you think about this?
What's even more gross about it is that if you've ever known someone who wants to have a baby, a lot of my friends are a little bit older now. A lot of people are desperate to have a child, desperate to have any type of a healthy baby. To welcome in and to have part of their lives and go through all these IVF treatments and everything to get pregnant. So, to refuse this on such a disgusting tribal anti-Semitic ground, it just illustrates their corruption more than anything else.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing them go through the IVF treatment, but that's a joke, people. That's all right, Morgan.
That was a good Freudian slip there, though, Jonathan. Kirk, what did you make of this?
If there's any good news to this story, it's that these horrible racists are not going to be procreating anytime soon. And now I know obviously they could maybe turn to a more favorable donor in their racist eyes, but hopefully they don't, because I think these are probably the last people that should be raising a kid if they think that genetics is destiny and that they're just rejecting this Jewish sperm donor just because of what happened after October 7th and the conflict of Israel. I mean, it's pretty insane.
Yeah, and I have to say, although I'm certainly not a biologist and couldn't claim to have read any Darwin, I'm pretty sure that ideas aren't transmitted genetically, if that's what they're worried about. So I think they could rest assured that's not what's going to happen. If it's even, and of course, it isn't even clear that what they're worried about is ideas. It's just the fact that he's Jewish, so it is just a kind of low form of racism.
Well, wait, can I throw you guys a trolley problem just as a little like fun thing?
Sure.
All right, you want to have a child, but you're not going to have a child, or you have to adopt Hitler's brother's sperm. Like what if it's someone in particular? Maybe you say like, I mean, does that make a difference at all? I'm just throwing. I know it's kind of an extreme trolley problem, but is there something about people are discriminating on some level when they go to a sperm bank, right? I mean, they say I want. So I mean, I'm not on something as basis, but is that a bizarre trolley problem or?
I mean, it's a bit bizarre, but also it's Hitler's brother. I guess that makes it kind of different. Why you wouldn't want Hitler's sperm? I can understand. Not because disease would be transmitted, but because you don't want the child, thinking, okay, my father is, killed millions of people.
Table that one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's an interest I haven't thought about, because I guess when people do go for sperm donations, they do really kind of go through a list of characteristics, right, of what they want the father to kind of be. And I guess this couple, since they seem to believe that oppression can be translated through sperm, I guess they're only going to be getting the sperm from a black trans woman, right? I guess that's the only acceptable father they can choose. I guess we'll have to see. We'll have to keep up with this story and see who they end up choosing. But that is an interesting question, Jonathan. I hadn't really thought about it.
It wouldn't be a father, Morgan. Women can
mother.
produce
Sorry,
sperm too.
Sorry, the third mother. So I mean, and I guess a kind of deeper aspect of this story, because there is something so ridiculous about it, which is I guess why we're making fun of it. But so often when we're talking about these problems with Israel, the suggestion of anti-Semitism comes up, and I think quite rightly. And people who it gets sort of alleged against, at least people who are in the West or in Australia, a Western nation, would be very uncomfortable with that, I think. And yet there are some times where they kind of say the thing which they want to keep quiet, and in this case they kind of said it, I guess, without really thinking about it. But they're rejecting this guy on the grounds that he's Jewish. There isn't even the pretense that it's because he's Israeli or that in some way he's tainted by Zionism or something. It is just a rank case of anti-Semitism, and it's so shocking.
What does it say about their own belief and their own abilities to actually raise a good person? They're so into this tribal identity to say, well, we're getting this, so it is what it is. There's no sense that they actually have an impact on their own child's life. It's predetermined because of their genetic composition.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly hope that child, that basically they don't raise a child, or if they were to raise a child, they would have to very seriously rethink how they look at the world and what they believe. Kirk, would you take Jonathan's trolley problem?
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I don't know. What do you think about it? Do you think there's something bad in how people think about this?
Like on paper, no. Like you're just raising a baby who just happens to have problematic uncles, but on the other hand, it's like at a certain point, this your kid might be interested in their family tree, and then it's like, oh look, it's Uncle Adolf up to his shenanigans again, and it's like, do you really want to deal with that?
Yeah. Well, the person who was sorry, Razzie, just before you go, the guy who was actually Hitler's nephew ended up living in Liverpool in the UK, and then ended up joining the US Navy fighting against his uncles. So we certainly know morality isn't transmitted genetically. But what were you going to say, Razzie?
Yeah, I mean, look, if the kid grows up and wants to follow in the uncle's footsteps, that's an education problem. That's the parents' fault, and could have happened. If it wasn't Hitler, who's his uncle, he'd find some excuse to become a bad person. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okie dokie.
Just
Anything
imagine
else?
getting nervous when he hits puberty and his like mustache starts growing in. Like, oh, what shape is it gonna be? I don't know. I will add though, it's like I'm seeing. I remember seeing like reports earlier this week about like protesters blocking the street in front of a Holocaust museum, and then this story, and it's like, how many more of these stories do we have to hear where it's like, okay, it's not just criticism of Israel, it's not just criticism of Israel's government and their foreign policy. It's like the whole anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism Venn diagram. It's practically a circle at this point.
Yeah, I mean I guess then that was kind of what I was trying to get at. And Rousey, what do you think about that? Because this is something that's so frustrating in talking about this is you have to kind of try and point out the anti-Semitism that's there, and people just want to avoid it at all costs. And this is a story where as I say, you see it slip out.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the fact that it's reported by right-wing news outlets tells you something about the ones who are silent on it. The left, when they talk about anti-Semitism, at least mainstream left, I'm thinking of The Guardian as I often do. It'll be something like, yeah, anti-Semitism is horrible. It's usually anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are a big problem. Like they mention Islamophobia on its own. They don't mention anti-Semitism on its own without Islamophobia. And yeah, I mean, the reason for that is because the left is generally, for the most part, I think, not okay with this. So, yeah, that's something and by the way, when are people going to realize this? Kirk, you asked. I think many people do realize it. We realize it, and we talk about it all the time. And the people who seem to not realize it, they're not realizing it because they don't want to, because this is where they stand.
Yeah, and I sometimes see people get annoyed in the comments if we end up trying to point out the anti-Semitism here, but we're not going to stop doing that. And again, as I recommend this book quite often, but if people want a very thoughtful and interesting account of the left's problem with this, David Baddiel, who's a comedian in the UK, wrote a book called Jews Don't Count, where he considers himself a left-wing progressive person, but is pointing out this problem because he himself is Jewish and has experienced it. And he's pointing out all the kind of hidden premises that underlie a lot of the way that people on the left think. And I think it's only about 120 pages, but that's a really interesting look into how the left has this problem and really dissects it. So I'd recommend everyone pick that up.
And just quickly, Akira says anti-Semitism is always blamed on white supremacists. Well, I mean, maybe the left blames it on white supremacists, and white supremacists are definitely to blame because they hate Jews as well. But yeah, it is these ideas are like across the board. All bad political philosophies have an element of anti-Semitism in them.
Didn't Marx once write an essay about like the Jewish question with a lot of anti-Semitism, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the same time that he was kind of writing that, he and Engels were tremendously praising Thomas Carlyle, who's a philosopher who lives not very far away from me, who was also virulently anti-Semitic. So this kind of blind spot goes back a long way. And he's usually a darling of the right.
And just, read Rand's article about racism, when she talks about viewing people as barnyard animals, which is what all these discussions are. Well, we've got one Jew, so he does this. We've got one Catholic, so he does that. And it's like looking at people exactly as you said, like barnyard animals, and as rational thinking individuals. So we always would recommend that as well.
For sure. And that actually sort of, I guess, links into our third story quite well, which is the revelation that one of a senior employee at the BBC called Dawn Quaver, I'm not exactly sure how to say her name, who works as a scheduler for BBC Three, so basically deciding what gets put on the TV and when. And BBC Three is one of the main kind of leading BBC channels. Had been making posts on her Facebook account calling Jews Nazi apartheid parasites who funded the Hollow hoax, saying the Holocaust is a hoax, and is referring to white people as a virus and a mutant invader species, and has been making comments about the UK being bigoted and genocidal, and that white Europeans are melanin recessive parasites. So on that kind of what your point, Jonathan, about regarding people as kind of barnyard animals, there's a deeply disgusting kind of language that goes along with all this kind of thought. And this is someone almost certainly coming from the left. It's not very common that kind of right-wing Nazis end up working for the BBC. This is someone who's going to be university educated, is going to have been kind of bathing in all these ideas, if that's the right metaphor, for a number of years. And there's a problem on the left that people think, basically because they're left-wing, they're immune to being racist. And yet this woman is, if you didn't know that she was on the left, you would just think she was a kind of old-fashioned Nazi, really, except that she's complaining about white people. Razi, what was your reaction on hearing about this at the BBC? Were you surprised by this?
So actually, I was added to the reality show as a last-minute replacement, and I didn't have time to look up this story.
Okay.
So I will spend a couple of minutes on it while the three of you talk.
Okay. Well, then, Kirk and Jonathan, I don't know what your impression of the BBC is from the outside, but then what did you make of this when you came across it? Did this surprise you? Jonathan, let's go with you.
Well, I mean, I'll just jump in, Morgan, to your point. I no question in my mind that this young woman is gone to a tremendously good, very expensive university. She's very highly educated, and that's where these ideas are taught. I mean, this seems like, people who end up in positions of power, whether it's politicians or publishing executives and people at the BBC, and that, it's like they were just in school 5, 8, 10, 12 years ago. And that's exactly what's being taught, at least in American universities, I know. Hatred for the West, hatred for capitalism, this unbelievable obsession with race and tribe. And, that has become de rigueur in terms of what's taught in the best universities. And, what's absent from all of it, of course, is any semblance of individualism, individual thought, individual reason, individual responsibility. So, no, I'm not surprised. It seems like, the most, well-regarded intellectuals these days, at least in my mind, are the most racist, the most tribal, the most corrupt. But that's what's being taught in schools, and the best ones around the globe.
Yeah. And just before I come to you, Kirk, I guess I'll say that when I studied English literature, which is probably one of the most lefty subjects out there, right? It's one that produces the most radicals. It was regular to complain about the number of white people who were on the curriculum. Like that was a very regular complaint. The phrase is pale, male, and stale. And even some of the professors would kind of joke about that. That was just a kind of acceptable thing which you could laugh about. And that might not have instantly turned these kids into Nazis, but that kind of baseline, or that drip, drip, drip of accepting those premises is what, after years and years and years, and then if you end up probably going and studying, I don't know, sociology, let's say she studied, where I think it's even more virulent, I think you can very much end up coming out just a really kind of nasty racist. Kirk, what did you make?
I mean, I think this is it's just another signal, I think, of two troubling trends. One of which is that a lot of the better people on the political left are suddenly realizing how awful a lot of their fellow travelers are. And a lot of them are perplexed, like, how did this happen? And it's like, back in 2019, the LA Times was putting out articles. They tweeted out an article that said, "Can you admire an anti-Semite and advance the cause for women? Maybe so. Life is full of contradictions." They later retitled the article, "Can you admire Louis Farrakhan and still advance the cause of women?" Because this was after it was reported that some of the leaders of the Women's March were admirers of Louis Farrakhan, like big admirers of Louis Farrakhan, who is known for his crazy anti-Semitism. And that was just sort of brushed aside and excused at the time. And now people on the better people on the left, especially since October 7th, they're like, holy crap, we have an anti-Semitism problem. And it's like, yeah, where were you guys 4 years ago when like Louis Farrakhan admirers were like at the forefront of like some of the like biggest left-wing political protests in the country? And I think this also just shows how corrupt the media is. And I think there's like this urge, especially amongst people on the right who want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. They see a lot of corruption in the media like this. And, they celebrate, like a couple weeks ago when it was reported that the LA Times, the same news organization I just mentioned. They had to lay off a bunch of workers, and a lot of people on the right were like, "Oh, this is cool. They deserve it for being so corrupt and whatnot." And it's like I get that sense, but at the same time, it's like the media is a profession that I think people, I don't want to say need. It's not like a basic necessity, but I want a healthy media. I think the media is important to disseminate information and distribute information so that people can consume it and be more knowledgeable and better educated about what's going on in the world, especially in the realm of politics. But then you have a lot of this corruption, whether it be the BBC or the LA Times or Fox News or whatever. It gives people a reason to just disregard it altogether. And even worse, they turn to more fringe types because they're like, well, if the media is this corrupt here and lying to me about this, then why not turn to someone who's, outside of the box or whatever?
Yeah, and I think that I shouldn't be shocked by this, but I wasn't surprised by the kind of racist comments she was making, but I was surprised to see the Holocaust denial, and I shouldn't be, but based on everything we've been saying. But there's something. I guess when I was growing up, I associated Holocaust denial with people like David Irving, who was basically a right-wing historian in the UK. Who wanted to kind of prove that Auschwitz wasn't a death camp, right? And famously went to trial about it. And he's basically just a right-wing thug posing as a historian. And these were the kind of low, disreputable people I associated with Holocaust denial. And I guess I'd kind of tacitly accepted the idea without realizing that people on the left didn't typically do this. And yet you see it from the horse's mouth right here. And I guess these ideas are a package. You can't say the other things without ultimately believing or accepting in some way that the Holocaust didn't really happen, or that it's being exaggerated in some way.
Well, and Morgan, when they say that Israel now is committing a Holocaust, I mean, that I've heard that, over and over again here in the States. They're committing a Holocaust now. When you're denigrating the actual Holocaust, the real Holocaust, kind of, maybe it's not outright denial, but really disparagement and diminishment of it. And now, Morgan, I wanted to quickly follow up on your pronunciation of the word scheduler. Could we hear that again, please, for American ears?
Scheduler.
I'm sorry. Must be something wrong with my earpiece. Can you say that again?
Scheduler.
All right. We'll get it in post.
Guys, we're on. So can I just say, we're on the Ayn Rand Center UK, and people keep teasing me for how I'm saying things. I'm on home territory here, guys. It's you guys are speaking funny, not me.
Yeah, we won't talk about Adidas until the reality show Extra. But so she works for BBC Three. Morgan, correct me if I'm wrong. That's the channel that used to be on television, now it's only online, right? And it's like targeted at young people.
Yeah, it was for a long time. I haven't watched BBC Three in a while, but when I was a kid, I would watch it a lot because it was, in a sense, the home of a lot of kind of comedy and creative outlets. So yeah, it's targeted towards young people. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was on BBC Three a few election cycles back that I watched some debate that was going on, for young people, first-time voters or whatever, in Scotland. And this woman got up and said how she's about to have her third child, and she was pretty young, and she said the council hasn't given her a home, and she's now, I don't remember what her living situation was. She wasn't like on the street or anything, but she was upset, or maybe the home that they did give her wasn't big enough, something like that. Then this other woman stood up and said, I'm 23. I've been working since I was 16. I just bought my first house, and I don't see why now I have to pay for this other woman's house. And one of the presenters was like, really didn't understand what she was saying. And she said, what do you mean I have to pay for her house? And this woman had to explain like, where these houses, the houses don't grow on trees, that somebody has to actually produce something, and then the government has to come in and take the product of their labor, or their money, basically, to pay for those homes. So yeah, I mean, the BBC, the main BBC coverage is so bad that it's hard to imagine something worse. But from what I remember from BBC Three, yeah, it is a younger version of that. And yeah, somebody like this clearly speaks in the language of somebody who was educated in the humanities in university, and I think that's only getting worse. And again, these people control how many people get their news and what that news is, you know, how that's shaped. And yeah, as a scheduler, she basically gets to decide who's on, right?
I was just going to
Yeah.
say, Bonnie Bertrand, who's also a YouTube member and a great supporter of ours, references, Morgan, what you were told in school. She says, pale, male, and stale is an outright attack on human knowledge, on conceptual knowledge.
Well, 100%. And what it ends up leading to is great literature being thrown out of the canon. And so it's very much a direct way of harming people's education, and also just corrupting their mind and making them think that these racist comments are acceptable. So not just are they more ignorant of literature, which is terrible enough, but their minds are being poisoned by it. But Razi, I wanted to ask you as well, since you have the pleasure of living in the UK and of getting the BBC inadvertently around you all the time. Something that when people complain that the BBC is too left wing, remarkably, people on the left, like our favorite journalist to rag on, Owen Jones, will say, no, the BBC is right wing, it's too right wing. And seeing all this Nazi-esque comments coming out of this controller's mouth, are you more plausibly convinced of the idea that the BBC is actually right wing?
I mean, you brought up Owen Jones. Owen Jones has now blocked me on Twitter.
Oh.
So it's, yeah, but I still see people posting screenshots of what he says. Yeah, of course they're going to say it's right wing. I mean, they, you know, nothing is good enough for them until, you know, until From the River to the Sea happens. So yeah, Owen Jones, you know, this military operation that the IDF did in a hospital, where they went in, you know, dressed as locals, went into the hospital, targeted the terrorists, killed the terrorists, and then people like Owen Jones are complaining about it. And I guess if you don't complain about it, you're right wing. By the way, I'm you know, not right wing because I don't belong with most people who define themselves that way, but I'm against that operation because I think the right thing to do would have been to not risk the soldiers and just take down the hospital. But yeah, the fact that people of the left don't like that other people of the left are not enough of the left, you know, they don't hate the Jews enough. That's not a surprise. Did anybody say that this particular woman is right wing? Or is it
No, I haven't seen that, but I know I was being facetious about, because the people in the left in the UK will very much with a straight face tell you that the BBC is too right wing, which basically means, as you say, they're not rabidly left wing enough for our taste, so therefore they're of the right. Except any objective look at the BBC clearly shows that their leaning is towards the left. It isn't towards conservative, you know, tradition, religion, faith, all that kind of stuff that you might think of a right-wing broadcaster as
Isn't that
holding.
just the nature, right, of public property? Is like who owns it, who controls it? Nobody. It's just whoever can like squawk the loudest or drum up the loudest protesters or, you know, rabble rouse the most. It's actually no one actually owns it and controls it. It's just up for public grabs.
By the way, sorry, just quickly, we have a $2 super chat from Bonnie. Bonnie says, so Daniel doesn't have to. That's, of course, a reference to the Owen Jones tip jar, which Daniel is the only one who puts money in. By the way, it's not my, I'm not forcing him to do that or anything. This is not an ARCUK policy, but I do appreciate anybody who contributes to the Owen Jones tip jar. As I promised, we're never going to mention him just for the tip jar. He's worthy of a mention, unfortunately, regardless.
Yeah, absolutely. Kirk and Jonathan, anything? We're just in the final 5 minutes, so anything, any final comments, anything like that? I mean, because I have a question I want to ask Razi, but just anything more on show topics just before we end.
I would like to nominate the producer Daniel for the Nobel Peace Prize, since anyone can nominate anyone for the prize. I nominate Daniel.
What about Alf? Remember that little munchkin guy, Alf? I think he's deserving of the Nobel Prize. He's still alive.
Is he?
Well, why not?
Didn't that stand for alien life form and he liked to eat cats?
I have no idea. Did we get Alf in the UK? Maybe we did. I don't know. Well, I don't know, Razzie, you seem to be sat in an interesting place. Can I ask where you are?
I'm in a home of somebody, I don't know if I can mention their name, Catherine Dickerson, who some of you know. So yeah,
Mm.
I moved myself to have this in the background. There's more there that I'd like to show. Maybe the setup, if I'm on tomorrow, you might get to see more of it. But yeah.
Yeah.
And happy Rand's Day once again to all. Go out and treat yourself to something today. Look up Dr. Binswanger's article about Rand's Day and learn a little something more about Miss Rand.
For sure. I wish I could go out and buy myself something. Unfortunately, I've had a fairly packed day of work, so maybe that's appropriate for Rand's Day. I don't know. Celebrating productivity. But okay, guys. If there's nothing else to say, shall we wrap up? Sure. Okay. Well,
Yeah, Alf again is a show about a family in California that hides an illegal alien in their house, and where a social worker can own a home in Los Angeles on a single income.
yeah, I should clearly go check it out. Razzie, were you going to say something?
I was gonna say something about that I'm in a house in California now, and maybe I'm considered illegal by some, but no. There was a joke in there. If I had more time, I would think of something better.
I'm sure it would win you a Nobel Prize for comedy, but there we go. All right, guys. So coming up at 7 o'clock, we have a premiere on the Briefly Objective, our other shorts channel, which is called Palestinians Cause Their Own Suffering. And that's a video of Mark Pellegrino, which everyone should go check out. That'll be premiering in 2 minutes. And everyone should sign up to become a member either of the YouTube channel or of ARC UK. So you can join us on Sunday for TRS Extra, which tends to be a bit more of a relaxed version of this show. Even though today actually was fairly relaxed and fairly jovial, it's the Sunday one will be more like this than usual, I guess. So I hope to see you all there.
Yeah, I mean, how can you not? Oh, are we off? All right.